thanks everyone, and thank you, Carrie and Sierra Fund, for inviting me to present and round out the great conversations and presentations that I've learned a lot from today. Thank you for including me and Blue Forest in that. It's really neat to see all the activities going on. So thank you for what I think is the hard work, the scientific work, the planning and the tools. I'm going to share a little bit about who Blue Forest is quickly. I promise to keep this to 20 minutes. And the thing about that is everyone's going to have questions afterwards, because finance is generally fairly foreign to a lot of folks, especially when you're talking about how does that play a role in the environment, or how could it for us to achieve shared goals in our shared mission. So Blue Forest is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we have a mission to use finance to help achieve sustainable solutions. What does that really mean? Well, I'm going to walk people through both how the Forest Resilience Bond works, because it's a mechanism that where I think we've crawled, we're ready to walk, hopefully with the Trapper Project in other parts of North Yuba and other forests outside of the Tahoe, and incorporate things like mine and meadow restoration as well. So we're really grateful to be part of this partnership. What Blue Forest tries to do is bring resources to implement projects. So we don't plan the projects. That's why we have to work with partners that we love, because they have the tools, the expertise, the time sometimes, and the ability to help articulate what should happen on the landscape, what is healthy for the environment, what is healthy for resilient communities. But once projects are planned, we look to bring resources to that. Now, there was a great question before that was asked, why does the Forest Service need more money to be able to get some of their work done? Well, that probably the bigger answer to that is because of us, because of the rest of society, and maybe because of Congress, and because on a federal level, disagreement amongst Congress. It's complicated, but in many ways, the budgets for the Forest Service have been relatively flat over the many last decades. But more and more of their budget has been consumed by fighting wildfire, both suppressing wildfire and the remediation afterwards. So when a larger share, now over half of their budget, going to wildfire response, suppression, and cleanup, that means there's less resources, at least from the Forest Service, to help pay for and fund the activities that would make those fires potentially less damaging, but also more resilient for communities and the other amenities that we enjoy. But the reality is that each landscape hosts has different values and benefits to different communities and different parties downstream. And the forest in California, the Sierra Nevada, is over 60% of the water supply for the whole state of California. So some of the activities that would reduce the wildfire risk, this is overly simplistic, but forest restoration, some of that is mechanical thinning and prescribed fire. There's also meadow restoration, which we have pictures of later. Thank you, Carrie, for sharing those with me in the past. This takes human resources and this takes money. And this is an overly simplistic picture of what overgrown versus restored could be. I'm not going to try and get into the scientific details. I'm going to get into the details of, nevertheless, restoring a landscape to a more resilient and a more historically, potentially representative landscape takes resources and money. So there's financial resources, which we saw are getting consumed from the Forest Service perspective by fire. But human resources are also stretched. Some forests, some national forests have 30–40% vacancy or unfilled positions, in part with a hiring freeze, in part because of lack of resources. Furthermore, the Forest Service works with many partners to accomplish projects. But when there's federal grants awarded, as well as state grants or other grants for restoration work, oftentimes those grants are in the form of reimbursable public funds, meaning you've maybe an NGO that might receive multiple millions of dollars to go do work. At least that's what I would like to see on the landscape in the future, bigger and bigger projects. But with bigger and bigger projects, NGOs have to figure out how to get some of that work done and invoice for it, and wait for those invoices to be repaid. that creates quite a lot of working capital challenges for implementing work on the large landscape. And frankly, I think it's a barrier to achieving the sort of landscape scale projects that we want to see. So why is there an opportunity for private capital? Private capital is another word for investor capital, capital that needs to be repaid. It's not just granted, at least from an investment standpoint. Well, there's a tremendous need from the Forest Service perspective, just on their land. These are 2017 numbers, the billions of dollars needed for restoration work. It doesn't all have to come from private capital. In fact, I would welcome if Congress wanted to fully fund all of this right now, but not everybody agrees with me, Nick Wobbrock, and so trying to make a compelling case for more and more of this to happen has an opportunity for private capital as well. But not just because of the capital need on the left, there's actually certain advantages that I'm going to talk about in detail about why using investor money, and what that even means we'll get into, to fund work can actually help make projects a bit more efficient, especially when we're talking at scale. For one is that idea of reimbursable money. So many times restoration projects, when they get bid out to contractors from an NGO, they'll say, we'll pay you when we get paid. Now, if you're a restoration crew, a logging crew, or you have the capacity to be able to do work in the forest, you have equipment you've financed, you have to stay busy. How nice does it sound to bid on a project where you say, well, you get paid when we get paid, independent of when you got the work done? That could become a 6-month lag on payments. That doesn't work for any company, as we've seen in the current really sad economic condition, with the need for couple-month bridge grant funding from the Paycheck Protection Program and equivalent. It also doesn't work, not just for companies trying to maintain a steady state, it doesn't work for trying to grow and build the restoration economy that I want to see, and I think we all want to see. That it can include jobs, and it can include rural, vibrant economies that in part are based on natural resource management for resiliency. So larger advantages of private capital include also landscape scale projects. The one thing finance can do, besides a lot of the headache that people normally associate with finance, is it can scale. In fact, investors like pension funds, university endowments, foundations even, they don't want to look at $500,000 projects. They want to look at $20 million projects. And they actually have a mandate. CalPERS, the Public Employee Retirement System in California, has a mandate to put money towards climate resilient infrastructure. And their chief investment officer said, I don't have any way to meet that mandate. So if you could provide an opportunity for me to put money into a project where I'll get that money back with a modest return, that would be a win-win-win across the board. I'll keep going in the interest of time, but nevertheless, there are quite a few opportunities for where private capital can help motivate projects and provide greater accountability. So we created something with many partners, the Forest Resilience Bond, in part with the Forest Service, in part with the World Resources Institute, and learning from so many groups on how to get this work done, including the National Forest Foundation, who is the nonprofit partner of the Forest Service. The Forest Resilience Bond is a way to invest, really lend to projects that provide a triple bottom line for achieving forest health restoration, social, environmental, and financial returns. To connect that type of investment, which I would say exists more now than ever before when you look at stock markets, pension funds, where the capital and wealth that's continued to accrue in our society, yet we can't quite figure out how to fund our water systems and our natural resource infrastructure, even though we could in the 50s and the 40s with much less people and much less technology and capital. We need to figure out a way to direct this massive resource that our society collectively has accumulated and get it to be funding the things that matter: forest management, watershed protection, climate resiliency, coastal resiliency. And how to connect that capital to forest management involves three things that we see. One is how do you evaluate the benefits, both the environmental outcomes in risk avoidance and enhancement as well as the economic value of those outcomes. Then what are the agreements and the contracts that need to be in place to be able to make different parties and participants, such as the Yuba Water Agency, who you heard before, earlier talk about the Yuba project, participate in a way that motivates projects to happen now and quickly to increase the pace and scale of restoration. And ultimately, how do all of those payments roll up into a financial vehicle so that you can access pension fund dollars so they're not going to across the globe for oil extraction, but actually going into the things that matter, like protecting California's water resources in our backyard. So how does the Forest Resilience Bond work? First, this is after projects have been planned and after projects have been conceived. So thank you everyone else on this call besides me, actually. But when there's a project planned and when those outcomes and expectations for the environmental resilience and the community outcomes that we all want to see are conceived, we help package a forest resilience bond where investors put money into an FRB project. That money just passes entirely to implementation partners who help augment the human resource capacity that the Forest Service has, but also, as we heard earlier, just lacks as well due to both their hiring constraints and agency constraints. Restoration activities are conducted by those implementation partners with, in part, enabled by the financial resources that are provided. That those restoration activities produce many of the outcomes that we care about. Now, these are some of the outcomes that we know people care about that have monetary value. There's a bigger list here that are outcomes that don't have any financial or monetary value. That's why we're doing this. But these are the outcomes that a hydropower company, that a community that, or recreational outcomes in tourism, wildfire risk reduction, water quality, water quantity, fisheries, aquatics. This is not meant to be comprehensive. This is just an example. And then beneficiaries such as a water agency or a state agency that has a stated goal of achieving those outcomes, pay back or reimburse, depending whether they have an agreement or a contract and their legal authority, to the Forest Resilience Bond, and investors are repaid all of this hard work for a smooth 2.5% rate of return, which is what our first project included. And in fact, many of the state and federal monies cannot provide a rate of return by law. They grant money to nonprofits to go do work. You're not allowed to use some of that money to cover interest. And so, as we said, that working capital issue becomes quite a bottleneck. And so part of the mechanism for how the Forest Resilience Bond works is the interest on the total investment is really covered by those non-state and federal beneficiaries. In this first project, where I would say we're crawling before we walk and before we run, hopefully together and with you, where we can do more and bigger and include other benefits, this first project, the Yuba Water Agency is covering that interest rate. I'll also say the Yuba Water Agency, as you all know better than I do too, doesn't just produce hydropower, but provides wholesale water, is a flood control district, provides recreational benefits on the reservoir. So we really went to one of the beneficiaries in a watershed that was an easier single point of contact for many benefits, but one could include in other areas many different agencies that are participating that cover all of those benefits. I'm going to quickly go through this so I can get done in my my 20 minutes that I said. I have 6 minutes left by my clock. So the Yuba project, which you've heard about a little bit, it's conducted actually not in the most fire-prone area of the Yuba watershed, but the expanded planning, which will include all of that. Here are the treatments of the Yuba project. It's not just prescribed fire and thinning, although this was all planned by the Forest Service. They didn't know where the money might come to implement it. In addition to wildfire resiliency, it also includes $500,000 into meadow restoration, aspen regeneration, some invasive removal. This is of a total $4 million investment, so $500,000 going into meadow restoration really isn't lip service. That's actually a sizable component to the project. Importantly, some of the benefits of that meadow restoration, while we qualitatively want to report on, are not helping to repay the investment, but benefits such as carbon or biodiversity, for example. I will skip over the partners who helped start the very first project, but nevertheless, this was a big undertaking, and we're excited to hopefully add more and include more in projects in other forests and in the Yuba area. So people ask, who are the investors often? Well, we have two foundations providing, the Rockefeller Foundation and the Moore Foundation provided 1% loans. AAA Insurance in California, the California arm, and Calvert Impact Capital provided 4% loans. So on average, the rate of return is at 2.5%. You could actually see this type of mechanism, what foundations have to provide below market rates called program-related investments. Some of you may have heard of that term before. This is analogous to something like the State Clean Water Revolving Fund. Could definitely provide 0 or 1% loans. In fact, Felicia Marcus, when she was the chair, said such, and there's only more interest now than in the past. Market rate investors who are getting 4%, you could see these as being the teacher's retirement system in California or a university endowment. So none of these investors are venture capital, hedge funds, taking risk, and none of the investors are actually even equity investors. They're called debt investors, they're lenders. They have 0 say in the project, 0 say over the active management of how the project gets done. They only have say in the very beginning when we ask them, will you invest or not? And if they say yes, then we say thank you. We keep them informed with reporting, but they have 0 ongoing say. So, the first full year of the Yuba project was quite a success. Just under $1 million were spent. This is some of the water monitoring reporting that we do for the Yuba Water Agency with the Sierra Nevada Research Institute with respect to how this project could or might impact their water quantity supply, in addition to things like wildfire risk reduction and the large woody debris that Willie had spoken about. Also importantly, some of the work on the right here, really, which is being funded by a CAL FIRE CCI grant, but wouldn't be reimbursed until that prescribed fire was fully completed. And so the ability to do prescribed fire prep on 1,200 acres and fire control line work on 19 miles, that's expensive, and you don't get reimbursed for that until you've actually put the fire on the ground, which is not going to be until 2020 or 2021. And so having working capital so you can pay to get that work done, even though you haven't been reimbursed by the CAL FIRE grant, is enormously important and helpful. In fact, Lon Henderson, the district ranger, I love this quote. I normally don't put a quote down like this, but he was saying, because of the Forest Resilience Bond, we're able to get most of this work done within 3 years of NEPA instead of over 10 years. So if we were to think about financial mechanisms for mines and meadows, how to incorporate that into a Forest Resilience Bond. Thank you, Carrie, for this slide. What are some of the outcomes and benefits from meadow restoration? Well, I know that they're largely big carbon sinks. They're huge hotspots for biodiversity. How you can help articulate what these outcomes and benefits are is enormously helpful for us. Some of those benefits everyone cares about. Some of those benefits have monetary value, in fact, retaining water longer into the season. Being a natural fire break, which helps reduce some of the fire risk as well. So want to encourage people to think about, we could have more discussion about that. What about some of the benefits for mine remediation, restoration, reclamation? I don't know yet, but I want to learn more. I mean, the impact to public health and the food web seems enormous. The sedimentation risk from destabilized slopes is enormous. And quite a few more impacts. So I think that type of outcome, some of those again have public health costs associated with them. They actually justify the investment or the repayment from an agency or from a third party because those outcomes are important. So the path to include mines and meadows, what are the outcomes from the restoration work that you're planning? And this is partly why we follow. We're the tail and you are the dog. The project is the dog, and what that project should be is really not defined by how do we pay for it from the beginning. We want to figure out how to pay for what matters and what should happen. And we're prepared to be allies and equipped to work with you all. We're a team of 8 that includes economists and engineers. We're not the planners though. We want to help articulate and make the business case for this work. What are the tools like the great mapping system and inventory of mines that we just saw that are being developed, and how can those help validate and estimate outcomes of concern? And then with partners and with you, how can we make an economic business case with respect not just to things like a carbon credit that might be generating revenue, but also how we're reducing risk for certain parties. So in the future, a forest resilience bond doesn't have to be just 5 simple cartoons, but also pictures that include mine reclamation and meadows, the biodiversity, the carbon, all of those other types of outcomes. I mean, we're talking a lot of dollars and cents, but the goal is to figure out how to make projects pencil out so we can see them happen bigger, faster, and quicker, and at a scale that is even more meaningful to what we all want to see accomplished. It's not to talk about the dollars and cents so we can figure out how to make money. It's to figure out how we can, as a nonprofit, bring resources to this work. We actually see that interest cost from a pension fund or a university endowment as really being a project cost that's necessary to make projects happen at the scale that we all want to see them happen at. So thank you for your time. We look forward to answering questions.